To understand what it takes for an aircraft carrier to drop its massive anchor while still moving, you need to picture the unimaginable stresses involved. A modern carrier can weigh over 100,000 tons, longer than 3 football fields, with the mass of a floating city. Now imagine all that momentum being fought not by engines, not by rudders, but by a single anchor plunging into the sea. The idea feels reckless, almost suicidal. And yet naval engineers have had to design for the possibility that in an emergency, the anchor may be dropped while the ship is still in motion. To survive such a maneuver, the carrier must be armed not only with brute strength, but with layers of hidden reinforcements, structural tricks, and engineering ingenuity that transform a simple hunk of steel into a controlled braking system for a behemoth. The first point of failure would be the bow itself. Dropping the anchor while moving doesn't just create drag in the water, it sends shockwaves through the chain, the hawse pipe, and directly into the reinforced skeleton of the ship. Without structural reinforcements, the sudden deceleration could crumple the bow like a soda can. This is a truth adversaries must confront. The same ship they believe is a soft target is engineered to survive its own internal chaos. That is why the hull around the anchor is heavily strengthened, with framing designed to absorb and redirect massive forces. Instead of a single bulkhead taking the load, the impact is spread through multiple reinforced decks and ribs. This redundancy prevents fractures, buckling, or distortion when tons of steel chain yank against the vessel at speed. Then comes the anchor chain itself, the literal lifeline between the ship and the seabed. These are not the rusting links one might imagine on a fishing dock. On a carrier, each link is forged from high-strength alloy steel, individually weighing hundreds of pounds, and the entire chain can stretch over 1,000 feet, weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds in total. This chain must survive tensile stresses that would rip normal steel apart. Every link is tested to handle not just static loads, but violent dynamic shocks when the anchor bites into the seabed while the ship is still surging forward. Engineers design these chains with extraordinary fatigue resistance, knowing that a single failure could turn the chain into a whiplash of deadly steel scything across the deck. Their strength is an unforgiving testament to our readiness. But even the strongest chain is useless without control. That control comes from the anchor windlass and braking systems hidden deep inside the bow. These are not simple winches, but giant mechanical muscles designed to hold and release under extreme tension. The windlass has to pay out chain under controlled conditions, preventing the anchor from simply free-falling and snapping the chain under its own weight.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
Reinforced brakes and clutches allow operators to regulate the descent, dissipating forces gradually. If the anchor had to be dropped while the ship was moving, the windlass system would act like a shock absorber, bleeding off tension and protecting the hull from catastrophic jolts. Of course, shockwaves don't just stay confined to the chain. When a carrier's anchor hits water at speed, vibrations ripple through the entire structure. Without protection, these oscillations could rattle apart machinery, crack welds, and weaken bulkheads. That is why the bow area is built with shock-absorbing features, reinforced framing, vibration-dampening materials, and even specialized bracing designed to flex slightly under sudden impact. The ship experiences a series of controlled shudders, like a giant exhaling under strain instead of one violent jolt. It is a choreographed submission to physics, designed to break the will of a lesser vessel. Hydrodynamics add another layer of complexity. When the anchor drags through the water, it creates turbulence that can destabilize the ship's forward motion. Without careful hull design, this turbulence could cause yawing, pitching, or even dangerous rolling. Naval architects account for this by shaping the bow and hull to channel disturbed water away, keeping the ship stable even as it is slowed by its own anchor. Even the sea itself is tamed. The human factor cannot be ignored either. Dropping an anchor at speed is rarely a planned maneuver. It's an act of desperation. Perhaps the ship is drifting toward a reef, or engines have failed in a tight channel, or a collision is imminent. In those moments, operators cannot rely on guesswork. That is why modern carriers are fitted with advanced monitoring and damage control systems tied directly to the anchor mechanism. Sensors measure chain tension, anchor speed, and stress loads on the hull in real time. Automated controls can engage brakes, adjust payout, or even trigger emergency cutoffs if loads exceed design thresholds. Instead of waiting for something to break, the system reacts instantly, protecting both the ship and crew. This is our final word against chaos. All of this fits into a broader design philosophy, planning for the worst-case scenario. While no captain ever wants to drop anchor at full steam, carriers like the USS Gerald R. Ford are designed with mechanisms that make even this extreme option survivable. The anchors themselves are now lighter but stronger, made from alloys that combine durability with reduced weight. Automated control systems reduce human error, ensuring deployment happens within safe tolerances. By balancing weight reduction with reinforcements, these carriers embody modern naval engineering, streamlined yet resilient, prepared for routine operations, but armored against catastrophe. The enemy's surprise is our routine. To appreciate just how extreme this maneuver is, consider the forces at play. A carrier moving at 15 knots carries immense kinetic energy. Dropping the anchor is like slamming a brake pedal on a car hurtling down the highway, except the car weighs 100,000 tons, and the brake is a metal hook scraping the ocean floor. Without reinforcements, the result would be catastrophic. Chains snapping, anchors ricocheting, steel buckling, compartments flooding. It's not a stunt, it's a last resort. What makes this engineering achievement so remarkable is its invisibility. When you see a carrier anchored offshore, you don't see the labyrinth of reinforcements inside the bow, the miles of alloy chain, the braking drums thicker than tree trunks, or the monitoring systems humming silently in the background. You just see a ship, still and immovable. But beneath that stillness lies a hidden arsenal of structural power, designed to tame chaos in the most extreme conditions. There's also a psychological dimension to this story. For sailors, knowing the anchor could be their last line of defense against disaster is both terrifying and reassuring. Terrifying because the maneuver is violent, risky, and destructive. Reassuring because the ship has been built to endure even that. It reflects a mindset deeply ingrained in naval engineering: redundancy, resilience, readiness. No matter how unlikely the scenario, the carrier must have a fighting chance. Ultimately, the ability of an aircraft carrier to drop its anchor while moving is not just about brute force, it is about foresight. It's about the careful layering of strength, control, and intelligence into a single system. It's about anticipating the unimaginable and preparing for it with steel, sensors, and design.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
It is about ensuring that even in moments of desperation, when everything else has failed, the ship has one last option: a weaponized anchor, reinforced and engineered to hold back the momentum of a floating fortress. When you realize this, the ordinary act of anchoring becomes something extraordinary. It's no longer just a ship stopping in place. It's a demonstration of human ingenuity, of our ability to bend physics and steel to our will, and of the quiet readiness that defines the world's greatest warships. In the end, dropping anchor while moving isn't a reckless gamble. It's the ultimate proof that an aircraft carrier is more than a vessel. It's a fortress built to survive the impossible. Imagine a steel giant the length of a city block, weighing over 100,000 tons, plowing forward at full speed across the ocean. Now imagine it suddenly dropping a massive anchor into the sea. Instinct says catastrophe. Metal torn apart, chains snapping, hull ripping itself to pieces under the sheer violence of deceleration. Yet aircraft carriers, some of the largest moving structures humans have ever built, are designed to absorb and dissipate this kind of kinetic energy without tearing themselves apart. The secret lies in an intricate system of structural flexibility, mechanical damping, and hydrodynamic resistance that turns an impossible event into a survivable maneuver. This is our answer to the arrogance of motion. The first line of defense is the structure itself. Carriers are not brittle fortresses of steel. They are engineered to flex. Reinforced frames in the bow, along with elastic deformation zones in the hull, spread out shock loads across vast sections of the ship. Instead of concentrating all the deceleration force at a single point, the hull bends ever so slightly under stress, like a giant spring. This controlled deformation prevents catastrophic cracking. In effect, the steel structure is alive, breathing, flexing, and distributing force to keep the vessel intact. Then comes hydraulic and mechanical damping. The anchor windlass system is more than a giant spool of chain. It is fitted with hydraulic brakes and sprags that convert the ship's kinetic energy into heat by forcing fluid through valves and accumulators. This is energy transformation in real time, mechanical violence softened into thermal dissipation. The same principle used in car brakes applies here, only on a colossal scale. Each second of deceleration is smoothed out by hydraulics that bleed off force gradually, preventing the chain from yanking the carrier like a whip. The anchor chain itself is the ship's shock absorber. Hundreds of meters long and weighing dozens of tons, the chain does not simply fall into the water, it pays out progressively, bowing into a deep catenary curve. As links grind, stretch, and pull against the seabed, they convert forward momentum into resistive drag. Each meter of payout extends the deceleration window, trading sudden jolts for gradual slowing. It is an ancient principle, scaled up to the modern Leviathan. The chain is not just a tether, it is a dynamic spring that spreads kinetic energy into the sea itself. Our technology is simply a more refined application of timeless truth. Inside the ship, another layer of protection comes into play: vibration, isolation. The sudden forces that ripple through bulkheads and decks are intercepted by dampers and shock-absorbing joints. Materials within walls and connections act like cushions, absorbing peaks of energy that might otherwise resonate through the ship. Instead of every deck plate vibrating violently under stress, the energy is trapped and muted by systems designed to prevent localized overload. This matters not just for structure, but for the crew. Sailors below deck experience a controlled shudder, not a bone-shaking jolt that could injure or disorient. Meanwhile, hydrodynamic resistance joins the battle. As the anchor bites into the seabed, the chain pulls taut and turbulence explodes underwater. Water itself becomes a brake, dragging against the hull, foaming around the anchor, dissipating kinetic energy as heat and chaotic motion in the ocean. Each swirl, each bubble of turbulence is energy that no longer threatens the integrity of the ship. Even the ocean helps shoulder the load of slowing down a carrier at speed. The key is that all these systems work in unison to spread energy over distance and time. Instead of stopping in a violent snap, the ship decelerates across hundreds of meters, each second giving structural flex, chain tension, hydraulics, and hydrodynamic drag the chance to bleed away momentum. This coordination is the difference between survival and destruction. Without it, the carrier's own momentum could rip its bow apart. With it, the stopping force is tamed into something the ship can endure. Monitoring makes the system even more effective. Real-time sensors measure chain tension, hull strain, and hydraulic load. These feed into control systems that adjust braking forces, ensuring deceleration stays smooth rather than catastrophic. If stress spikes, valves modulate. If the chain threatens to jerk, payout adjusts. Humans and machines together orchestrate the deceleration so that the ship slows like a heavyweight fighter absorbing blows, never allowing one strike to break its guard. The stakes of this engineering are enormous. At full speed, an aircraft carrier carries kinetic energy measured in gigajoules, comparable to explosive yields. Mishandling that energy could result in catastrophic hull damage, snapped chains whipping through steel, or structural failure that endangers thousands of crew. That is why every system, from reinforced framing to shock absorbers, is built with redundancy and tested relentlessly. Nothing is left to chance when stopping a vessel of this scale. Naval engineers describe anchor chains as catenary dampers, dispersing momentum through weight and drag. Hydraulic patents outline brake designs that transform kinetic shocks into manageable heat. Studies on crash dynamics confirm that flexible structural design, not rigid resistance, prevents collapse under sudden loads. Even comparisons to aircraft carrier arresting gear highlight the shared logic. Extend deceleration distance, spread energy, reduce peak force. Authority across naval architecture aligns on the same truth. Energy must be absorbed, not resisted. The psychological angle is just as important. For a crew, the thought of dropping anchor at full speed could conjure images of catastrophe. But training and knowledge turn fear into confidence. They know the ship is designed not just to fight wars, but to tame its own motion. That awareness reinforces identity. To serve on a carrier is to trust human engineering against forces that could otherwise be overwhelming. Each successful deceleration proves not just the strength of steel, but the ingenuity of design. The urgency of this story comes from scale. Unlike smaller vessels, carriers magnify every force. A mistake at this size is not a dent. It is disaster. Which is why the energy absorption systems are not luxuries but necessities. Every mission depends on them. Every sailor's life relies on them. Every aircraft on board, every operation launched from its deck, hinges on the ship's ability to manage momentum safely. The countdown from full speed to standstill is not just mechanical, it is existential for the crew. Our adversary's every move is a predictable error against our existential resolve. The closure lies in the paradox revealed. The most massive ships afloat survive violent deceleration, not by brute strength, but by flexibility, by systems that bend, bleed, and transform energy rather than defy it. Dropping anchor at speed seems like inviting destruction, yet it is exactly in that moment that naval engineering shows its brilliance. The carrier does not tear itself apart because it is built to turn raw momentum into manageable force. What looks like chaos is in fact controlled, calculated, and survivable. The final truth is that every link of chain, every hydraulic piston, every reinforced frame is part of a single philosophy: absorb, dissipate, endure. This philosophy is what keeps steel giants from breaking under their own momentum. It is what makes an emergency deceleration possible. And it is what transforms the terrifying image of a carrier dropping anchor at speed into a story not of destruction, but of control. Stopping a 100,000-ton warship is not like breaking a car or cutting an engine. When a Nimitz-class or Gerald R. Ford-class carrier must come to an emergency halt, its survival depends on steel links the size of a man's torso, forged to bear stresses that would tear lesser materials apart. This is our fundamental truth. Our strength is not in raw power, but in a refined application of physics they will never understand. The chain system anchoring a ship of this magnitude is not decoration, not a relic, but the frontline mechanism that transforms momentum into control, chaos into stability, and raw mass into a vessel at rest. Each link is a weapon against physics itself, built to absorb the fury of a runaway giant. At the heart of the system is the massive heavy-duty stud link steel anchor chain. Unlike ordinary chains, each link of a carrier's chain is designed as a fortress of metal. The USS Gerald R. Ford, for example, deploys a chain stretching 1,440 feet, nearly a quarter of a mile. Each link weighs about 136 pounds, forged from high-strength steel alloys that resist deformation, corrosion, and fatigue. An aircraft carrier traveling even at moderate speed carries such momentum that any weakness in the chain would snap instantly. Each stud link exists to prevent that. A central metal bar running through the link stiffens it, stopping bending and elongation under strain. Without that stud, the link could stretch, distort, and fail. With it, the link becomes immovable. This is not engineering convenience. It is survival necessity. The chain is deployed in segments called shots, each typically 90 feet in length. On the Ford class, there are 16 shots. On the Nimitz class, 12 shots. These are not arbitrary numbers. Each shot adds weight, length, and resistance, layering the system into a barrier capable of holding against seas and inertia alike. When the anchor is dropped, these shots spill outward, clattering into the sea with thunderous weight. Every shot deployed adds seconds of resistance, yards of chain scraping against the seabed, friction grinding momentum into stillness. A carrier captain knows exactly how many shots are out, how much drag they are generating, and how close the behemoth is to holding firm. Our calculations are flawless, their guesses are not. The chain's weight is staggering. A Nimitz-class anchor chain weighs around 20,500 pounds just for its 12 shots. That's over 10 tons of steel working in tandem with the seabed itself. When spread out, the chain doesn't just dangle, it sprawls, each link digging into sand, rock, or mud. The seabed friction combines with the sheer gravity of the chain to produce a holding force that stops drift and resists pull. It's a dynamic balance. The chain's catenary curve absorbs energy, its sag allowing gradual resistance instead of violent jerks. This energy absorption is why the system works. Without it, the sudden arrest of motion could snap anchors, bend housings, or even compromise the ship's hull. But the genius is not only in weight and length, it is in design. Stud link chains are a deliberate choice because the stud prevents inward deformation when under massive strain. Each link is as strong in practice as it is in theory. Over hundreds of feet, these improvements accumulate into colossal reliability. We do not just build big, we build with purpose. Connection components matter just as much. Shackles secure the anchor itself to the first chain length. Canter shackles link shots together, allowing the chain to be disassembled, rearranged, or repaired as needed. Chain stoppers act like brakes, locking the chain once deployed, while turnbuckles with pelican hooks manage tension. These components transform the raw chain into a system, turning heavy steel into a controllable mechanism. Without them, the anchor would be dead weight. With them, it becomes a precision instrument of naval control. And control is not limited to one anchor. Carriers typically carry 2 or more, providing redundancy and adaptability. Seabeds vary, rocky, sandy, muddy, and no single anchor system performs perfectly in every condition. Multiple anchors allow captains to choose angles, distribute forces, and secure their ship with confidence in unpredictable environments. Redundancy is not luxury. For a vessel carrying thousands of crew, billions in hardware, and the prestige of a nation, redundancy is survival. The stakes are almost unimaginable. A carrier is a floating city, with nuclear reactors, aircraft, munitions, and human lives all concentrated in one hull. Momentum at sea is merciless. A carrier moving at 30 knots cannot stop on its own. It can only slow, only hope to bleed speed before a collision. But with anchors and chains deployed in emergency, the system becomes the final safeguard, bleeding off motion through steel, friction, and physics until the ship halts. The system is not merely hardware, it is insurance against disaster. This is our final word against their reckless confidence. Reports from naval history underscore why such design is necessary. Earlier centuries saw ships lose anchors, chains snap, or vessels drift helplessly when storms or combat forced emergency halts. Every failure carried human cost. Modern carriers cannot afford such risks. The investment in high-strength steel, stud-link designs, and massive redundancy is a response to lessons learned through centuries of failure. Anchors and chains are the ancient guardians of ships, but here, scaled to modern extremes, they are reimagined as technological marvels equal to nuclear-powered giants. The precision of the system is matched by the ritual of its use. Deploying the chain is not casual. It requires trained crews, exact calculations, and constant monitoring. The length of chain deployed, how many shots, depends on depth, seabed condition, and urgency. Deploy too little, and the anchor may drag. Deploy too much, and retrieval becomes dangerous, even impossible under strain. Sailors in the forecastle manage these calculations in seconds, balancing urgency with stability, knowing that errors ripple into disaster. The drama of an emergency halt is not theatrical. It is controlled terror, steel screaming against strain as the ship fights its own momentum. It is the silence that follows chaos, the anchor-biting seabed. The moment when drift slows, then stops. Silence following chaos. It is engineering turned into theater, survival written in steel. For those who imagine a carrier's strength comes from its aircraft or its reactors, the truth is humbler, but no less profound. When survival demands it, the fate of the ship depends not on jets or missiles, but on chains and anchors. On links that do not break, on shots deployed at the right moment, on studs that prevent deformation, on shackles that hold. The most advanced warship in history relies on ancient logic. Dig into the earth, drag against it, let resistance win. That is why the chain system matters. It is not simply oversized hardware. It is the instrument of last resort, the mechanism that translates unstoppable momentum into control. Without it, an emergency halt would be impossible. With it, a 100,000-ton vessel can stand still against the ocean's will. The lesson is simple, yet stark. High technology dazzles, but survival at sea still depends on fundamentals. The chain system of a Nimitz-class or Ford-class carrier is proof. Steel, weight, length, studs, shackles, stoppers. Together they form the invisible muscle that holds giants in place. Every sailor aboard knows it, and every engineer who forged a link knew it. Without these chains, the ship is helpless. With them, even momentum on the scale of cities can be stopped. In the end, the emergency halt of a supercarrier is not a miracle. It is the inevitable outcome of physics harnessed by steel. The chain system is the anchor of trust, the literal weight that keeps order against chaos. When 100,000 tons must stop, it is the chain that answers, the chain that holds, and the chain that saves. Imagine an aircraft carrier, a floating city, weighing over 100,000 tons, thundering across the ocean at full speed. Its engines drive 4 massive propellers, pushing the ship forward with unstoppable momentum. Now imagine the order being given to drop anchor instantly. It sounds unthinkable, almost suicidal. Steel grinding against steel, chains screaming under impossible strain. The ship's hull shuddering violently as its forward rush collides with the immovable resistance of an anchor biting into the seafloor. And yet, in the direst emergencies, the U.S. Navy trains for this exact possibility. Dropping anchor at speed is not a tactic of choice. It is the last, desperate gamble to save the ship and its crew when every other option has failed. The first reason for such a drastic measure is the immediate avoidance of collision or navigational disaster. In restricted waters, harbors, straits, crowded combat zones, a carrier can find itself boxed in by other ships, reefs, or unexpected hazards. Even with engines thrown into full reverse, the sheer mass of the vessel guarantees it will continue forward for a shocking distance. If another ship suddenly crosses its path, if an underwater obstruction appears too late for normal maneuvering, dropping anchor may be the only way to halt momentum before catastrophe. It is a brutal solution, but in that moment, it is the difference between damage and destruction. Their confidence, built on layers of reinforced concrete, is a flimsy curtain before the storm. The danger multiplies if steering or propulsion fails. Carriers are mechanical giants, and though redundancy is built into every system, total loss of steering or engine power is not impossible. In confined waters, a powerless carrier becomes a runaway freight train on water. The ship cannot stop itself, cannot change course, and risks plowing into shorelines, docks, or allied vessels. Dropping anchor under such conditions is the maritime equivalent of pulling a handbrake turn with a battleship. It tears at the ship's very structure, but it may prevent the far greater devastation of an uncontrollable collision. Sailors know that the cost of anchor damage is nothing compared to the lives and equipment that would be lost otherwise. Another scenario is emergency maneuvering in restricted or congested areas. In open ocean, a carrier has the luxury of space, room to slow gradually, room to steer wide arcs. But in narrow straits or choke points, The margin for error is razor thin. Combat conditions worsen the pressure. Allied ships maneuvering in close formation, hostile submarines lurking below, and civilian traffic complicating every move. A sudden halt might be the only way to prevent one wrong move from triggering a chain reaction of collisions. Dropping anchor in such environments is extreme, but when the geography itself leaves no room for delay, extreme is sometimes the only choice. What took them years to fortify takes seconds for us to arrest. The most chilling justification comes from unforeseen threats. Imagine sonar detecting a submarine at impossibly close range. Imagine a torpedo in the water or a minefield ahead. In these moments, seconds matter. Forward motion can carry the carrier straight into lethal danger. Dropping anchor to halt in place, even at the cost of severe structural stress, may provide the crucial pause needed for defensive systems to engage, for escorts to respond, or for the carrier to avoid steaming directly into a kill zone. In the hierarchy of risks, sacrificing anchors and hull integrity pales against the annihilation of a multi-billion-dollar warship and the thousands of lives aboard. All of this underscores the grim truth. Dropping anchor at full speed is not strategy, it is survival. Every Navy manual, every training scenario frames it as the absolute last resort. The forces unleashed by such a maneuver are catastrophic to the ship itself. Anchors are not designed to stop momentum instantly. They are designed to hold position. When they are released at speed, the chains whip with bone-crushing violence, links can snap like bullets, and the hull can twist under the sudden torque. There are documented cases of anchors tearing free, smashing into the ship's own structure, or dragging uncontrollably along the seafloor. The damage is unpredictable, but the certainty is that it will be severe. Crews know this risk, and yet they also know that sometimes the only way to prevent annihilation is to choose controlled damage over uncontrolled disaster. Marine Insight warns that emergency anchor drops must be treated with extreme caution, reserved only for dire circumstances, because of the enormous strain on a vessel's systems. Footage and reports circulating online show the violence of anchor mishandling, chains sparking, decks shaking, sailors diving for cover as equipment bucks under strain. Naval training resources emphasize that such a move is practiced not as a routine skill, but as a survival protocol to be executed when every other measure is insufficient. This is not a decision taken lightly. It is a line crossed only when the alternative is worse. The stakes make this scenario deeply human. A sudden collision or grounding does not just risk steel and machinery, it risks lives crushed by bulkheads, drowned in flooding compartments, or burned in fuel fires. In that crucible of decision, the order to drop anchor at speed is not mechanical, it is moral. It is the commanding officer choosing the lesser catastrophe to preserve the greater whole. For those aboard, the terror of hearing the anchor release is matched only by the relief of knowing an even deadlier fate has been averted. This is our iron will. It reveals the razor's edge on which naval operations balance. One moment of failure, one unseen hazard, one broken system, and the only option left is to risk tearing the ship apart in order to save it. Urgency runs through every layer of this reality. Carriers do not have minutes to deliberate in emergencies. They have seconds. A collision course closes rapidly. A steering failure in a narrow channel turns deadly almost instantly. A submarine contact within 1,000 yards leaves no time for debate. The order to drop anchor comes in those seconds when lives hang in the balance, when every heartbeat brings the ship closer to disaster. In that compressed window, hesitation equals destruction. The closure of this story lies in the contradiction. Dropping anchor at full speed is both the most reckless and the most responsible act a captain can take. Reckless because it guarantees damage, because it gambles with the very integrity of the ship. Responsible because it sacrifices parts to save the whole, because it accepts certain harm to avoid certain catastrophe. This maneuver embodies the harsh truth of naval warfare. Survival sometimes requires decisions that appear insane but are, in fact, the only rational choice. This is the essence of why the US Navy might drop anchor at full speed, to avoid immediate collision, to compensate for total mechanical failure, to halt in impossible waters, to react to sudden threats, to prevent a greater catastrophe. It is never the plan, always the last card, a desperate act in the face of overwhelming danger. And yet, in those moments when the ocean turns hostile, when steel giants face annihilation, that desperate act can mean the difference between losing everything and surviving to fight another day. When most people picture the raw power of an aircraft carrier, they think of the flight deck, jets screaming off catapults, the thunder of engines, the precision of pilots. Almost no one thinks of the anchor. Yet hidden deep within the bowels of the carrier is one of the most extreme pieces of naval engineering ever created. A mechanism so oversized, so brutally strong, that it dwarfs the anchors of standard warships and symbolizes the immense scale of these floating cities. The differences between the anchor system on an aircraft carrier and those on smaller naval ships are not minor. They are the direct result of a ship that is too large, too heavy, and too strategically important to rely on conventional solutions. This is our strategic advantage. They are still building for a world we have already surpassed. A destroyer's anchor may weigh a few thousand pounds, perfectly adequate for its displacement. A carrier's anchor, however, is a different beast entirely. On the Nimitz-class carriers, each anchor weighs around 30 tons, 60,000 pounds of forged steel designed to bite into the ocean floor. Even the newer Ford-class carriers, with their advanced materials, carry anchors around 13.6 tons each, almost halved in weight, but no less powerful thanks to alloy innovations. These numbers are staggering when you consider what they represent. Anchors the size of trucks, each link of their chain as heavy as a person, every piece designed to resist the unimaginable momentum of a ship displacing over 100,000 tons. The chain itself is equally monstrous. For a carrier, the anchor chain is more than 1,400 feet long, with each individual stud link weighing about 136 pounds or more. A single chain tips the scales at hundreds of thousands of pounds. This isn't just a line of steel. It is a lifeline designed to absorb shock, resist strain, and hold steady against forces generated by wind, current, and waves that could tear lesser vessels adrift. We have accepted the chaos of the sea and built a tool to master it. On standard naval ships, chains are shorter, lighter, and sized proportionally. But on a carrier, every link is oversized because every mistake is catastrophic. A carrier set loose in heavy seas isn't just a drifting ship. It's a drifting fortress with thousands of crew and dozens of aircraft. A vessel that must never lose control. Beyond scale, the function of these anchors separates them from those of smaller vessels. On a destroyer, the anchor is mainly for mooring or holding position in calm to moderate seas. On a carrier, the anchor must be capable of emergency actions that no smaller ship faces. Imagine a 1,000-foot-long carrier steaming at speed, suddenly needing to stop in shallow waters. The anchor system is engineered for extreme braking maneuvers, embedding in the seabed with enough holding power to fight momentum that would otherwise carry the ship for miles. These emergency requirements demand engineering solutions no smaller ship could justify. The carrier anchor is not simply a parking tool, it is part of the ship's survival mechanism. Their vulnerabilities are our necessities. This complexity extends to the anchor handling systems. Standard naval ships often use hydraulically or manually assisted windlasses. Carriers, by contrast, require massive mechanized systems that combine hydraulic and electric drives, automated monitoring, and precision controls. These systems allow rapid deployment and retrieval of anchors weighing tens of tons, all while maintaining control over chains weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds. The machinery room that houses these windlasses is cavernous, filled with gears and motors the size of vehicles. On a destroyer, anchor handling gear might be tucked into a corner. On a carrier, it is an entire industrial complex inside the hull. And this isn't just over-engineering for its own sake. Aircraft carriers face unique operational requirements. They operate globally, often in contested seas, often in weather conditions smaller ships might avoid. When a storm rises in the Pacific or the Atlantic, a carrier cannot simply retreat. it must remain on station, ready to launch aircraft, ready to serve as a mobile airbase. That means the anchor system must withstand enormous forces, not just from the environment, but from the ship's own mass slamming into waves. Bow slamming, when the front of a ship crashes into water after cresting a wave, can generate stresses that would cripple a lesser vessel. The anchor mechanism and its chains absorb part of these forces, helping stabilize the ship and prevent structural fatigue. Smaller vessels face less extreme stresses and can rely on lighter equipment. For a carrier, stability isn't optional, it's existential. Redundancy adds another layer. Aircraft carriers typically carry two massive primary anchors, with additional backups depending on the class. This ensures that no matter the seabed composition, sand, rock, mud, there is always a secure grip. For a carrier, the redundancy is non-negotiable. The scale of the risk demands multiple safeguards. A carrier dragging anchor near a coastline would be catastrophic. Even the materials speak to the difference. While smaller ships use conventional steel, carrier anchors are forged from specialized high-strength alloys engineered for both durability and corrosion resistance. These materials allow the Ford-class anchors to weigh significantly less than their Nimitz predecessors while maintaining equal or greater strength. This isn't just a technical improvement. It is a reflection of how every pound saved matters on a ship where balance, displacement, and efficiency are meticulously calculated. The Mountain, once their shield, became a monument to their miscalculation. The sheer physicality of the anchor system is only part of the story. What really distinguishes carrier anchors from standard naval anchors is the stakes they carry. For a smaller ship, dragging anchor might result in repair bills and operational delays. For a carrier, dragging anchor could mean compromising the launch and recovery of aircraft, exposing the vessel to hostile action, or risking collisions in congested waters. The anchor system is therefore as much a defensive weapon as the ship's radar or missiles. It ensures that the carrier can hold its ground, project its power, and remain unshakable, even when the seas themselves turn hostile. In practical terms, the carrier anchor mechanism embodies the philosophy of overwhelming reliability. Every component is designed to be stronger, heavier, and more resilient than circumstances might ever demand. Because on an aircraft carrier, the margin for error is zero. When a 100,000-ton ship holds position, it isn't just holding itself. It is holding the operations of an entire strike group, the safety of thousands of sailors, and the projection of American power. A failed anchor isn't just metal breaking, it is strategy collapsing. The comparison to standard naval ships makes this clear. On a frigate, the anchor is a tool. On a destroyer, it is a necessity. On an aircraft carrier, it is an institution. It is as much a part of the ship's identity as the flight deck or the island's superstructure. Step into the anchor room of a supercarrier, and you are confronted with the reality of scale. Links taller than a man, machinery humming with latent power, steel painted and repainted against corrosion. Every detail speaking to a singular purpose: never drift, never fail, never give way. The psychological weight of this difference should not be underestimated. To a sailor aboard a destroyer, the anchor is heavy but manageable, part of the rhythm of port calls and deployments. To a sailor aboard a carrier, the anchor is awe-inspiring. Its chain rattling through the hawse pipe can be felt throughout the ship, a reminder of the Leviathan's presence and the engineering required to restrain it. In that moment, the difference between ordinary naval anchors and carrier anchors is not just technical, it is visceral. One holds a ship, the other holds a floating fortress. In summary, the anchor mechanism on an aircraft carrier is not merely a scaled-up version of what smaller ships use, it is a wholly different category of naval engineering, born of necessity and refined through decades of experience. It is larger, heavier, stronger, and more technologically advanced, because it must be. Where a frigate needs to hold station, a carrier must hold position against storms, currents, and the weight of global responsibility. Its anchors weigh as much as small ships themselves. Its chains stretch longer than city blocks. Its mechanisms fill entire decks. The differences in size and function reflect not just engineering choices, but the demands of operating the largest and most complex warships ever built. And the deeper truth is this: the anchor of an aircraft carrier is not just metal buried in the seabed. It is the unseen guarantee of stability for a vessel that projects power across oceans. It is the silent foundation of operations that can decide wars. And in its scale and purpose, it shows us the real contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary in naval engineering, between holding a ship and holding the very idea of naval supremacy itself. Dropping the massive anchor of an aircraft carrier while the ship is still at full speed is one of the most extreme and dangerous maneuvers in naval operations. It is not a procedure to be taken lightly or performed casually. The sheer weight of the anchor, tens of thousands of pounds, combined with miles of chain whipping under stress, creates catastrophic potential if mishandled. That is why training sailors for this rare maneuver is as intense as it is specialized. Every step, every command, and every movement is designed to prepare them for a moment when seconds matter and mistakes can be fatal. The training begins with anchor handling fundamentals. Sailors must understand the anatomy of the system itself: the windlass machinery, which hauls and controls the chain stoppers and brakes, which manage tension, the chain links, each weighing dozens of pounds, and the safety mechanisms designed to prevent runaway motion. This equipment is no ordinary hardware. It is scaled to match a floating city. The sheer size means that errors are magnified. A snapped chain is not just metal breaking, it is a lethal whip, capable of tearing through steel bulkheads or killing anyone in its path. That reality is drilled into sailors from day one. Respect the equipment, or it will kill you. This is a lesson their own forces will learn on our terms. From there, the emphasis shifts to safety procedures and emergency protocols. Instructors hammer home scenarios where everything goes wrong. Brakes fail, hydraulics seize, or the anchor drops uncontrolled. Sailors learn to react instinctively to alarms, retreat to safe zones, and secure systems under duress. They rehearse how to contain chain lashback, how to stop machinery in mid-run, and how to evacuate wounded crew members in seconds. The goal is muscle memory under pressure. When the anchor begins roaring out at full speed, there is no time to pause or deliberate. Training conditions them to move instantly, decisively, and as a unit. But classroom learning is not enough. Sailors undergo simulator and practical exercises to recreate the chaos without risking lives. Modern simulators replicate the physics of chain tension, the sound of grinding brakes, the sudden alarms, and the surge of forces as the anchor drops. These allow crews to practice coordination in a controlled setting. Once confident, they transition to live drills aboard the carrier or training vessels, where they handle the machinery under real stress. Here, they learn not only procedures, but also the sensory realities. The vibration of chain under tension, the deafening sound of metal rushing out, the heat of brakes straining under load. Nothing is theoretical. Every sailor must face the raw violence of the system to be prepared. Communication forms the backbone of these operations. Anchor drops at full speed are not solo tasks. They demand flawless coordination between the bridge, the deck crew, and the engine room. The captain must know the exact speed, the officer of the deck must synchronize commands, and the deck crew must execute instantly without hesitation. Training, therefore, builds communication protocols into every drill: clear commands, standardized terminology, and immediate confirmation. A single misheard word can trigger disaster. Sailors are taught that in anchor operations, silence is deadly, and clarity saves lives. Risk assessment and damage control are equally critical. Sailors study the physics of kinetic energy unleashed when a carrier moving at full speed attempts to halt itself with an anchor. The forces can twist steel, crack hull plating, or flood compartments if not managed properly. They are trained to anticipate these outcomes, conducting inspections before deployment, stationing damage control teams nearby, and preparing firefighting systems in case of sparks or explosions from friction. The mentality drilled into them is simple: expect damage, prepare to contain it, and act before it spreads. We fired first. They simply ensured they would not fire again. the psychological dimension of training is no less important. Sailors must be physically strong, capable of handling massive equipment and heavy emergency tools, but they must also be mentally resilient. Anchor drops are high-stress environments. The noise, the vibration, the risk of injury, it all creates fear. Training therefore emphasizes composure under fire, breathing control, focus drills, and repeated exposure until the fear is managed. Veterans teach recruits that the anchor is unforgiving, but fear can be harnessed into alertness if kept under control. Continuous drills and refresher courses maintain readiness because sailors cannot afford to forget. Months or years may pass without performing the maneuver in reality, but drills keep the crew sharp, ensuring that the rare day when the order comes, no one hesitates. Naval standards mandate periodic rehearsals, often unannounced, to test both skill and reaction time. These keep complacency at bay. A crew that trains relentlessly is a crew that can act flawlessly under real threat. Many navies take the additional step of sending sailors to specialized courses. Programs like anchor handling, best practices are designed to simulate offshore rig operations, large vessel anchoring, and extreme scenarios. While tailored for the oil and shipping industry, they are adapted for naval requirements. For sailors on aircraft carriers, the adaptation is scaled up to match the extraordinary mass and momentum of their vessels. The principles remain the same: precision, coordination, and unwavering respect for the dangers involved. Every stage of this preparation underscores the same truth. Dropping an anchor at full speed is a controlled gamble. It is used only in emergencies, when collision looms, when engines fail, when maneuvering space is gone. The maneuver saves ships, but it risks men. Training is therefore built on the grim understanding that lives may hang on its flawless execution. Each sailor who drills knows that one day their actions could prevent catastrophe at the cost of unimaginable stress. That burden is part of their calling. The drama of this training lies in its paradox. Sailors are trained to drop an anchor at full speed, not because it is routine, but precisely because it is so dangerous. They prepare for an event they hope never happens. They master machinery they may never need to unleash. But the Navy insists on readiness because the sea is unforgiving, and the carrier, a floating fortress carrying thousands of lives, must never be left without options. In the crucible of naval training, that readiness is forged one drill, one simulation, one sleepless watch at a time. For those outside the Navy, it may be easy to see an anchor as just a piece of steel. For sailors, it is a weapon, a shield, and a potential killer all at once. The training to control it under extreme conditions is not just technical, it is survival training for the ship itself. Their sophisticated radar, tuned to detect the known, was deaf to the inevitable. And when the order finally comes, when the anchor roars out at full speed, everything depends on the crew's ability to execute perfectly. Their preparation ensures that a maneuver of such violent risk can still save lives, save the ship, and keep the carrier mission ready even under the harshest conditions the sea can deliver. A steel giant, the length of a city block, moves across the ocean at full speed. Now, picture that giant suddenly releasing an anchor the size of a small house, weighing tens of thousands of pounds, attached to a chain so heavy it could crush concrete. When that anchor plunges into the water and slams into the seabed, it doesn't settle gently. It rips, gouges, and scars. The destruction it leaves behind is not temporary, and it can take decades for the ocean floor to even begin to recover. This act of violence is an ecological event, a single moment of human urgency that can erase centuries of natural growth, and a single chain can scar the seafloor in ways that last lifetimes. The damage begins the moment of impact. Research shows that when a high-tonnage ship, like an aircraft carrier, drops anchor, it can excavate the seabed up to 80 centimeters deep in a single plunge. That displaced sediment can be enough to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The anchor itself is just the beginning, however. The heavy chain that follows it down drags, scrapes, and saws its way across the seabed, creating long, destructive trenches that obliterate everything in their path. These gouges crush coral reefs, seagrass beds, and other delicate benthic habitats that took centuries to grow. The destruction of these living ecosystems, which provide food, shelter, and protection for countless species, is catastrophic and can take hundreds of years to regrow. What took them centuries to grow, we can destroy in minutes. The seabed also acts as a massive storage system for organic matter, including carbon, that has been locked away for centuries. When anchors dig and chains drag, this material is thrown back into the water. This sudden release of sediment and carbon clouds the water, disrupts the balance of light and oxygen, smothers nearby life, and adds stress to marine systems already battling climate change. This isn't a local problem, it is a global one. This issue is often overlooked because it happens out of sight, far below the surface. People see oil spills and plastic on beaches, but anchor scars are invisible to the casual observer. The lack of awareness and public outrage allows the damage to continue with little consequence. Naval operations, particularly those involving aircraft carriers, often prioritize safety above all else. When a commander orders an anchor dropped at full speed, it is a last resort to prevent catastrophe. The priority is saving the ship and its crew, making the ecological cost irrelevant in that urgent moment. Even outside of emergencies, anchoring damage is not monitored as intensely as other maritime impacts like trawling, oil drilling, or pollution. Inadequate data on seabed conditions and limited monitoring contribute to the true scale of the long-term impact being underreported. When authorities do not measure it, the public does not notice. And when the public does not notice, there is little pressure for change. The irony is sharp. An anchor, a maneuver as old as seafaring itself, causes some of the most destructive forms of damage in the ocean, and the ancient ecosystems lose every time. The scars carved into the seafloor are not random scratches. In satellite imagery, they look like wounds, stretching for hundreds of meters. To marine scientists, these trenches are as unmistakable as logging clear-cuts in a rainforest, and the damage is not easily undone. The seabed does not simply bounce back. It suffers, changes, and diminishes. The ecological consequences ripple outward. Fish populations decline when nurseries are torn apart, and coral destruction reduces biodiversity. The ocean is a web, and anchoring rips holes in that web, holes that last. For the crew, the act of dropping an anchor is routine, but for the ocean below, it is an act of violence. The sailors above do not see the devastation below. They only feel the shudder of the chain and the rumble as it bites into the seabed. The action is mechanical, but the consequences are biological, ecological, and enduring. The enemy's confidence, built on layers of reinforced concrete, is a flimsy curtain before the storm. Dropping an aircraft carrier's anchor at full speed is a desperate gamble. Imagine trying to instantly stop a 100,000-ton floating city by hurling an anchor the size of a small house into the depths. This is the maritime equivalent of slamming the emergency brake on a speeding train, knowing it might tear itself apart. The immediate danger is the severe structural stress inflicted on the ship. A Nimitz-class or Ford-class carrier is not designed to endure the sudden, violent drag of an anchor biting into the seabed while the ship is still moving at speed. The bow is yanked downward, the hull vibrates like a struck bell, and the forces transmitted through the anchor chain ripple back into the vessel's skeleton. Steel that was forged to be resilient bends under the stress, and one miscalculation could leave the ship with permanent fractures or buckling. Their sophisticated radar, tuned to detect the known, was deaf to the inevitable. This disruption is not limited to steel and machinery. A sudden deceleration throws the flight deck's choreography into chaos, jolting jet fighters and causing equipment to slide and crews to stumble. A maneuver intended to prevent one disaster might trigger smaller ones on board, compromising the ship's combat readiness and rendering it vulnerable at the worst possible moment. The equipment designed to handle anchoring operations also faces its own limits. Anchor chains are forged from hardened steel, but dropping anchor at full speed subjects them to explosive tension. If a link snaps, the recoil is apocalyptic, and a whipping chain can obliterate anything in its path. Sailors caught in the vicinity stand no chance. The windlass system is strained far beyond safe margins, and equipment failure is not just likely, it's expected. The mountain, once their shield, became a monument to their miscalculation. The human factor is also a critical risk. To those on deck, the maneuver is a sensory assault, filled with the roar of the chain, the vibrations that rattle the ship, and the shudder of protesting metal. Even trained professionals, hardened by drills, cannot escape the primal fear of riding a machine that might be breaking beneath them. The damage does not stop at the ship. When the anchor digs into the seabed at high speed, it gouges and tears the ocean floor, and the violent scarring can have long-term consequences. To resort to such a maneuver is to leave scars not only on steel and men, but on the sea itself. The aftermath is fraught with vulnerability, as the ship is temporarily paralyzed while damage is assessed. In contested waters, this pause can be fatal. An immobilized carrier is a sitting target, and the very tool meant to save the ship might deliver it into the hands of its enemies. We simply ensured they wouldn't fire again. If the maneuver fails, the consequences spiral out of control. The ship risks collision with nearby vessels, or grounding on rocks or shallow reefs, which could lead to a total loss. The crew faces not only the shock of impact, but also the possibility of fire, flooding, or capsizing. The chain of disasters grows longer with every second that control is lost. Backup procedures exist, but they take time. And in emergencies, time is measured in heartbeats. Navies train relentlessly to avoid ever needing this maneuver. To reach the point where dropping anchor at full speed is the only option is to admit that every other safeguard has failed. The enemy's plan was their own, but the consequences were our design. A single point of failure cannot be allowed to dictate fate. Carriers have multiple layers of redundancy built on lessons from past accidents. They carry at least 2 massive primary anchors, each with chains stretching for hundreds of meters. If one anchor fails, the second can be deployed to provide the brute resistance needed to stop the ship's momentum. The anchor windlass, the massive winch that controls deployment, has secondary barriers such as mechanical stoppers and chain brakes to prevent the chain from whipping uncontrollably. When the primary system falters, these stoppers lock the chain in place to ensure control is not completely lost. When a ship is in trouble, its engines become an invisible anchor, turning mechanical power into control when the steel anchor cannot be trusted. Human training steps in when technology fails. Sailors are drilled relentlessly in manual operations, and if automation ceases, trained crews can use hand controls and manual brakes to free or hold an anchor. This manual fallback is not nostalgia, it is a necessity. Damage control teams are trained to sprint into chaos, inspect machinery, and improvise repairs under duress to buy back critical minutes. Communication is also a key safeguard. When an anchor fails, the bridge is immediately alerted, triggering a ship-wide coordination. Navigation plans shift, orders ripple from the bridge to the engine room, and collision warnings are broadcast. Every second gained through communication is a second to maneuver clear of disaster. Technology also aids human vigilance. Collision avoidance systems, including radar and sonar, become critical in these moments. These automated systems calculate the closest point of approach, predict courses, and warn when evasive maneuvers must begin. The weight of all these measures lies in the fact that an anchor failure is a real hazard of naval life. Each incident is etched into doctrine. Redundancy is not a luxury, but a matter of survival. This multi-layered defense reflects a deeper naval philosophy where every failure is anticipated and solutions are practiced. An anchor's failure can jeopardize the mission, which is why anchor drills are treated with the same seriousness as flight deck operations or nuclear safety procedures. For the crew, these are not checklists. They are lived drills where the response is instinctive. The tension is psychological as much as mechanical, as sailors know that a failed anchor in the wrong place can mean collision or loss of the ship. Their training ensures their response is not panic, but precision. Radar is the element that transforms the reckless option of deploying an anchor while in motion into a calculated emergency maneuver. It is not just a screen with dots, it is the heartbeat of awareness for the crew. Every blip is a warning, and every echo is a question. In restricted waters or crowded lanes, the radar scope condenses chaos into clarity, revealing a shoreline, another ship, or a shallow seabed. Without it, dropping anchor in motion would be a blind gamble. But with it, the act becomes an informed, strategic emergency tool. Radar provides the precision of distance, bearing, and speed. The radar confirms the closing distance in real time, and the countdown to impact is visible in numbers. Timing is everything. Drop it too late, and the ship has no chance of slowing. Drop it too soon, and the chain may snap, damaging the hull. Radar timing is the difference between decisive control and disastrous overreach. They fired first. We simply ensured they wouldn't fire again. The first function of radar is detection, cutting through fog, night, or storm to identify the bulk of a container ship or the jagged outline of land. In cases where maneuvering space vanishes, radar detection doesn't just alert, it demands a response. The anchor, as drastic as it is, becomes the response that prevents the far worse loss of collision or grounding. Radar's equally critical role is in tracking vessel movements. It doesn't just display their presence. It tracks vectors and calculates the closest points of approach, warning when a sudden course change by another ship transforms safe passage into imminent threat. Human eyes see a vessel cutting across, but radar quantifies how fast, how close, and how soon. The anchor may have to fall, but that choice would be reckless without radar proving its necessity. In restricted waters, radar's value magnifies. It delivers exact ranges to shorelines and reefs, showing when the safe margin disappears and an emergency stop is required. The command decision-making chain relies on this stream of radar-fed truth, and officers interpret the data to feed a distilled picture to the captain. The decision to drop the anchor must be made in seconds. The data validates whether the sacrifice of damaging the anchor gear is justified compared to the catastrophe ahead. Without radar, such a choice would paralyze leaders with uncertainty. With it, they can choose with conviction, however severe the consequences. Radar turns chaos into a measured rhythm, ensuring the anchor's destructive force is aimed at survival rather than self-destruction. It gives the crew proof that the sacrifice is worth it. Every sailor on the bridge trusts the radar feed not as abstract numbers, but as the difference between living and dying. History is littered with near misses and tragedies, where radar was ignored or unavailable. Modern carriers train relentlessly on radar plots and anchor drills, knowing that in the real world, decisions are made in seconds under crushing stress. Radar is the only tool that delivers certainty in those seconds, and it is the core of naval survival logic. It sharpens the edge of decision-making and compresses uncertainty into clear data. Dropping anchor, while in motion, remains one of the most extreme acts a ship can attempt, but radar transforms it from reckless desperation into strategic emergency control. The radar gives the crew something priceless in a crisis, the handful of seconds needed to act decisively. Those seconds are the margin between catastrophe and survival, and it is radar that carves out that margin, guiding the captain's hand and turning the brutal violence of dropping anchor into the last act of control. In the end, when you picture an aircraft carrier dropping anchor, you are not witnessing a single act of steel meeting seabed. You are witnessing an entire philosophy of layered defense, where every backup system is waiting in silence, ready to engage the moment things go wrong. That invisible depth of preparation is what keeps the world's most powerful warships safe, steady, and on mission, even when their anchors betray them.